And welcome to another edition of the Basic Thoughtonomics podcast. I'm your host, Chris Grosso. For this episode, going to try and talk some more baseball. Very excited to have this guest on. He's John Harper of SNY TV, the TV home of the New York Mets. And John joins us for this episode. John, thanks so much for coming on today. How you doing so far? How you getting along with this quarantine? It's almost become like a routine now. I think we're about a month into it. Just how you handling everything so far?
Yeah, hi Chris, how are you? It's strange times, no doubt. Being being shut down from pretty much everything and not having any sports to watch isn't helping.
Yeah.
So, but let's hope we all get through it. Obviously, safety for everybody is first, and I don't know. There's no end in sight, but we know at some point we'll get through it.
Yeah. Hopefully sooner rather than later. That's I think we all have to be optimistic, have that approach to it. And I'm just curious. I've asked friends, family this. How are you staying occupied with this whole social distancing thing when you have downtime? I think we kind of got to be creative. I'm just curious, what are you doing personally to stay occupied during this time?
A lot of reading, and reading, catching up on some books that I have in my that I've had in my list for a while. I haven't gotten to. And what I was never a big news guy, but I've really you have to pay attention to what's going on, and I've become a lot more interested in watching CNN and staying on top of this thing and listening to what the experts have to say. And and it's been interesting to watch. Governor Cuomo has kind of become a star in this thing. He seems to be, I haven't followed it that closely, but he seems to be a straight shooter. He seems to have the personality of a leader. That's kind of what you look for. So that takes up some time, especially I'm watching a lot of that stuff at night, and then making sure I get my workouts. I'm dedicated to working out still.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
I'm a big racquetball player. I haven't been able to do that since they shut down my LA Fitness nearby. But I pretty much every day I get out and go up to actually my old high school, and they have a turf field, and I bring a medicine ball and some dumbbells and kind of put together a different workout every day with some of that. They have big hills there too, so I do some running on hills. So combine all of that, and I'm managing to get through the days.
That's important. Sounds like you're staying productive. I think it's important we all stay productive. Just been wondering, like you said, you've been reading books. Have you been watching any YouTube or anything, trying to watch old games, get that baseball fixing? I know I've been doing a little bit of that.
Yeah, occasionally. It kind of it depends on the mood. Sometimes I feel like it, sometimes I don't. I did get into it a couple of weeks ago. I didn't watch the Gibson game. I know a lot of people were talking about that the other night. I was actually at that game way back when he hit the home run. Still can't believe Eckersley threw him a slider there. It's the only pitch you could hit with that bad leg,
I know.
But I did. I got into the weekend. A couple weekends ago, they had the '86 playoff games with the Astros on, and that's still fascinating to me. Mets Astros, because I was covering those too, and I'll never forget that 16-inning game and being there in Houston. How just suspenseful that was, mostly because the threat of Mike Scott in Game 7. It made it feel like a Game 7 to the Mets because they knew they couldn't beat Scott. So occasionally I watched that, a little bit of that here and there, and I actually watched. They had I think it was somebody had on the Dodgers-Mets 2015 Game 5 against the Dodgers when DeGrom pitched, and I watched that again, and I remember it because I was there in LA. That game, that was one of the great games. It just felt like from first pitch to last that you could feel the suspense. And DeGrom, that really showed it to me how good he was going to be, because he didn't have his good fastball, and he managed to get through 6 innings, only gave up I think 2 runs, and he had to do it really kind of inventing his way through it with his off-speed stuff. I was really fascinated to see he used his curveball, which he's kind of a pitch he doesn't even hardly use anymore.
Yeah.
But, that was interesting. So some games I do pick up on. I watched that Yankees-Red Sox 78 playoff game again. But I haven't watched a whole lot of them. Yeah, that's a classic game. But haven't watched. Like, I don't make it a daily occurrence to watch that. Sometimes it's more it's more depressing to watch it than anything else, just to remind you that you can't find baseball these days, live baseball anyway.
I know. Yeah, I was watching. I called into WFAN about this yesterday. I was watching Game 7 of the Mets and Cardinals 2006, and I'm a Met fan.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, it was.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but I more just wanted to go back and see the atmosphere that night, how the electricity of the crowd. Were you at the stadium that night?
Yeah. It was that was electric. Yeah, and when Chavez makes the catch, you're thinking there's no way they can lose the game, right?
I know. And
but then who was it? I can't. Who's the reliever? I'm drawing a blank now.
On the Mets?
Heilman gave up the home run. Yeah. That was a killer.
Yeah, and I always think about that bottom of the 6th inning too. They had bases loaded, 1 out. Scott Rowland made a huge error, and I remember Jose Valentin. He just with 1 out, he struck out, and all he had to do was just put the ball in play. And then
that was, I know, everybody looks back at the Beltran at bat, but the Valentin at bat to me was the biggest at bat of the game, because if they get a couple runs there, then everything changes.
I know. That's what I always think about. I think most people remember Beltran striking out to end the game, but I always think about that 6th inning when I thought they could have won it there, and
well, they had the better team. They should have. Should have figured out. I know they had pitching issues, but they had the better team. They should have figured out a way to win it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, the Cardinals won 83 games, and I know the Mets had some pitching issues that year. Pedro was hurt, and El Duque, who was their best starter down the stretch, got hurt too.
He got hurt. Yeah.
And but yeah, they were still the bet. They should have beat the Cardinals. I don't know if they would have beat the Tigers, but yeah, I felt like that series was theirs.
It would have been interesting. For sure, because you figured their offense would have put up some runs against the Tigers. And that turned out to be. It felt like at the time they were just getting that thing rolling, and then they collapsed in 2007 and 2008, and before you know it, they're in a. Then the Bertie Madoff thing happens, and it took them 5 or 6 years to recover from that, from all that stuff. So
I know.
It's not.
It's painful to bring up.
Yeah, I know. It's Mets fans have endured a lot of pain over the years.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, we had 2015, but I don't know. Since then, it's kind of just I don't know. It's gone down a little bit, and I don't know. Yeah,
I thought that was going to be a first step toward more chances, and. Some of the pitching. I mean, the Harvey thing obviously hurt, and when he fell off the map, and they just haven't. They went through a period where they just didn't have enough in their farm system to supplement the talent on the major league level, and they had injuries, and they couldn't fill in the gaps, and so it was. They had 2016. They got there again in the wild card game, and they lost, and then. Since then, it's been a struggle. Right? It looks like they're putting it back together. I feel like this team has a chance, and we'll see if there's even a season. But I was in spring training, and a lot of optimism there about everything. I mean, they did that. They fell short last year, but they did show you that they have a core of young players better than I thought they would be able to have at this point, with guys like Alonso and McNeil and Rosario, all these guys. So I think they have a chance to be good. We'll see if it comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask you a little bit about this later, but the Syndergaard injury, obviously, huge, kind of took us all by surprise. I guess I'll ask about that a little later, but I guess just getting into the current state of the game, I'll ask straight up: do you think there's going to be a season this year?
I do. I don't know if we'll have fans in the stands, but I think the fact that this Anthony Fauci has come out in support of it, basically, I think is important. And even Cuomo, I saw where he mentioned that he spoke to Jeff Wilpon about the idea of playing without fans in the stands. I think there's a lot of they're starting to get some momentum, and on that side, on the governmental side, because they realize I think the sports would help with the morale of the country. So I do think they'll figure out a way to do it. I think it'll probably end up being, at least at the start, because who knows where this thing's going to go, but as far as this disease, but at least at the start, I could see them, implementing one of these ideas that they've talked about, the Arizona plan, or playing in spring training sites in Florida and Arizona. And I think that's the way they'd have to do it. But I do think there will be a season. I don't think we're going to see baseball for at least another. I don't think it. I mean, middle to late June is about the earliest I could see it coming back, though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just going to be a season unlike any other. I don't think. I don't know. At this point, we're going to see baseball actually played in New York, because especially given that it's just been such a hot spot for the virus. I mean, part of me just wants to see the game come back and just be like pure and natural, and it'll be played in the home ballparks and in front of fans. But I just think I have to accept the fact that that's not going to be the case this year. I think even like playoff. I mean, if they do get the playoffs, it'll be in neutral sites, whether it's dome stadiums or warm weather stadiums like Miami or something. But yeah, I guess I just have to accept it's going to be a different season this year, like that.
Yeah, I think you got to almost take what you can get at this point, and it won't be the same, no doubt. And it would be weird if they get to a World Series that's played in a neutral site for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're a fan and you love baseball, you'll take what you can get, and I know, listen, they're going to do whatever they can to play because they make their money off TV. The owners make their money off TV anyway. So the fans in the stands are secondary to the TV contract. So I think that's where they're headed, and it'll be strange, but it'll still be it'll be baseball that counts, and I think that will I think fans will adapt to watching it that way.
Right.
And I think there's still hope that by late in the season you could get back to normal in terms of fans. But you're starting to hear these comments from some of these governors that I think it was the California governor who said he couldn't imagine sports in stadiums in California until 2021. So maybe we're not going to see it till next year as far as fans back in the stands, but. At this point, I think most anybody would take what they can get.
Yeah, no, we'll see. And there's that, like you were saying before, I guess the huge economic factor to bring the game back, to have the players get paid, to have the Dodgers get a season out of Mookie Betts, and you kind of think about that, like how much that would suck for them. But
they could lose him to free agency without ever playing for the Dodgers. That would be bad since they gave up a couple of pretty good players in return for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's just the economic factor to just get the game back, and I get that. And I guess we'll try and talk some on-the-field stuff here a little bit, even though we're not sure if and when the season will come back. But I just want to get your thoughts on how you think this delay affects the Yankees and the Mets. And I would think it would affect the Yankees more positively, being that Judge was on the sideline, Stanton, Paxton underwent surgery. So assuming, when baseball comes back, they'll all be healthy. But just, I guess, what are your thoughts about that? You think this benefits the Yankees, or are there other teams out there you think this delay could potentially benefit?
Well, the Yankees kind of jumped to the forefront because of those injuries. They had high-profile injuries with Stanton and Judge and Paxton. Yeah, you would think that that's good for them. Although, I mean, we always kind of talk about it this way. You give a guy more time, but then there's going to be other injuries. But still, I do think, if the Yankees can stay healthy from the start, I thought they were the best team. Losing Severino won't help him. He's out for the year. But they still, you put that offense. The one thing I wonder about, though, is if you shorten the season and you only end up playing, say, 80 games, the one thing about the Yankees is I think their overall talent on the field, assuming they're healthy, is what makes them better than everybody else. And if you reduce the games, you kind of reduce that gap in talent from other teams. So I wonder if it would give a team like the Rays more of a chance to stay with the Yankees for over 80 games compared to 162, when the Rays pitching can match up with the Yankees. They just can't match up offensively because over 162, there's so many bad teams and such bad pitching that the Yankees are just going to kind of bludgeon people with that offense. So
right.
I think in that respect, I think it might give the Rays, a team like the Rays, a little bit more shot to stay with the Yankees over a shorter season.
Yeah, that's a good point. Didn't think of how maybe a shortened season could impact the teams in regards to that.
Some of it would depend on the schedule too, because you're not going to depends. It's going to be a lot more inequity in the schedule because you're going to play some teams, you're not going to play others,
right?
And that's going to favor one team over another as well.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of scheduling, yeah, that's a good point too. You just not sure how this is going to play out, how it could affect teams on the field. So that'll be interesting to see. And I wanted to get your opinion from a Met perspective. I think this delay really hurts them. I mean, God forbid there isn't a season. You're losing a season of Jacob deGrom in his prime. And the Mets were winning out team this year. They have all these pitchers who are going to be free agents next year. Stroman, Porcello, Wacha were signed to 1-year deals. The Mets were kind of a team that was all in for this season. So I do think one benefit could be if the universal DH is implemented, you'll be able to get Cespedes playing pretty regularly. But I just love to hear your thoughts on how you think this delay affects the Mets.
Yeah, I know that one idea of playing in Florida and Arizona with creating different divisions and playing everybody playing with the DH. I think that would be a huge benefit to the Mets because you could use Cespedes and maybe Cano as well as a DH, and even Ramos. I mean, they have a lot of guys that can qualify as DH candidates for sure. But losing Syndergaard is a pretty big blow. I think if they can keep their other guys healthy, I think they could have enough starting pitching. To me, the key is still about I mean, you're right. They are all in. So if this season goes by the board somehow, they are really up against it because they have all kinds of possibilities of losing free agents. And but I still think it comes back to the bullpen. That's what I said from the start, going back to the off season. I mean, Diaz, who knows? He didn't look great in spring training when he was there, but you can't make too much of that. He was throwing hard. They said they liked what they saw from his slider, although he gave up some hits with it. I think though Diaz, Familia, those are the guys. If they could bounce back, you add Lugo to that mix, who was great out of the bullpen last year, and then you got Betances as well. So the possibility is there for a great bullpen, but you need bounce backs from those guys. There's so much uncertainty there. That's where the Mets, to me, could be anywhere from a 95-win team to below 500 because there's so much uncertainty there. So I don't know. I don't know how the shorter season could affect them. It might help them because they're going to lean on the pitching, and they're going to maybe they would reduce the impact of losing Syndergaard. But Conforto probably was going to miss the start of the year, so they should have him back. I talked to him when I was down in Port St. Lucie. He feels like he's on the verge of a big year. He feels like it's taken him a couple of years to really completely get over that shoulder injury the shoulder surgery he had and everything else. So we'll see. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch. You really like Alonso, McNeil, that core of young guys.
Oh, yeah.
And I like J.D. Davis as well. I mean, Cespedes could be a big bonus if he can play, but I think they need to find a way to get J.D. Davis at bats because I think that kid can really hit. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and we'll see. I mean, team stuff aside, the guy who could really be the loser here is deGrom in terms of a guy who, he got started kind of late. Just looking at we know he's got a shot at making the Hall of Fame, but if he were to lose a season or even only be able to play, if they turn this into more like a half season, it might really hurt his chances of getting to the Hall of Fame because he has to make the most of what he's got, already being, I think, going into his age 32 season. So, Yeah, he needs to put up numbers fast because if he's going to make it, he's got to make the most of these next few years. So that's kind of an interesting sidelight to me in addition to the team stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about with DeGrom because he came up a little later. He was 26 when he came up. So I think, these are all big years for him, just both from a team perspective and from a personal perspective. So, yeah, I mean, he has a lot to lose if, with the delay in this season.
Yeah.
And we talked about Noah before with the Tommy John surgery. I think that all kind of took us by surprise. What was your initial reaction to that? Because it's like the Mets, they still have a pretty good rotation if all the guys could pitch up to their capabilities. But just what was your reaction to that news? Because I think it all took us by surprise, given that it was canceled.
Yeah, well, mostly, they were already shut down for a couple of weeks at that point. That was a surprise to me, although it wasn't a big picture. I guess it wasn't a shock because it's almost like a lot of, I talked to enough pitching coaches and former pitchers who kept thinking that he was going to get hurt at some point because he was such a maximum effort guy with his delivery and throwing as hard as he did. And he pushed his workouts he pushed his workouts to the extreme. He tore his lat in 2017. And after he got hurt, I talked to Rick Peterson, their former coach, who's really into the biomechanics. Yeah, and he was kind of worried for years. He kept saying he thought Syndergaard needed to learn how to pitch at less than maximum all the time, so he could throw that 99 and 100 when he needed it, but throw 95 at times and not be putting as much stress on his arm. And so from that perspective, I guess it's not shocking that he got hurt, but it is a blow to the Mets because when I was in spring training, there was a lot of optimism around him too, because it seemed like he had finally bought into this idea that he didn't have to throw his slider 95 miles an hour. He was, we heard him talk about a lot about that, how frustrated he was last year. But between the new pitching coach Jeremy Hefner and some of the analytics they were showing him, he was throwing that slider in spring training about 87, 88, but with a sharper break, and it was working as kind of an off-speed pitch to keep hitters off his fastball, because you talk to scouts and they've always been puzzled why he doesn't get more swings and misses, especially in the last few years on his fastball. And they think a lot of it is that these hitters just are geared up for everything hard, even his slider.
Right.
When it can be a nasty pitch, but they're on time with it. Sometimes they're going to swing and miss against it. So they felt like in spring training he had kind of bought into this idea that the 87 mile an hour slider could be effective for him. And he was talking about how he kind of learned from last year to stop overanalyzing everything and just go out and trust his talent. So it felt like he was on the right track to maybe getting to the point where everybody thinks he can get to, is being an elite starter again. So it's a shame because he'll miss 2020. And talking to Peterson, he says, this whole time frame on the Tommy John surgery and the return from it has changed in recent years because these guys who throw harder now, they need more than it used to be thought of as a 12-month time frame. Now it's at least 15 months and maybe more. And we saw, Wheeler he missed 2 full years. Matz, when he was young and had it, he missed 2 full years. It's possible that the Mets may not even get Syndergaard back for much at all of 2021, and then he's a free agent after that season. So this really throws everything into chaos as far as his career and his future with the Mets. So it's really going to be something to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I had Anthony DiComo on my last episode, and I was just asking him, like you were talking about how Syndergaard, they were trying to get him to throw his slider with a little less velocity. I feel like at this stage in their career, I mean, I guess he obviously did throw the slider a little slower, but can guys ramp it down? Like, I feel like they're probably so used to throwing the way they do, throwing max effort. It's like asking Syndergaard to throw 95. I feel that might be hard for him to adjust to that. I feel with this whole epidemic with Tommy John and stuff, I think it needs to be really addressed more for the next generation coming up, because I think coaches at the youth level should more try and emphasize command and command and location. But yeah, I just like to get your thoughts on that. What just your thoughts on how Syndergaard maybe how they're trying to get him to tick back on velocity? Just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they've tried for years to get him. He says he couldn't throw with the same command at 94, 95 as he did when he was throwing all out. So that was part of it. But he did. He really did seem to take to this idea that he could throw the slider with less velocity. It had to do with his grip and his release and all that. It didn't seem hard for him because he was commanding it pretty well, had a good down break, and he was getting swings and misses in spring training. So I think the difference is that he throwing that there, that kind of created this variance between that and his fastball. When he's throwing his fastball 98, 99, now that slider is a full 10 to 12 mile an hour slower, and it really changes the way hitters, they have to be more aware of that, and they can't just be sitting on everything hard, because even his changeup is 90, 91. So I think the slider was going to have a big benefit for him, but we'll see. It's all some of it is just a pitcher's mindset. Pitchers have to be able to understand it. I've talked to John Smoltz a lot about this, that, you can pitch effectively without throwing max effort all the time. You can save that extra 3 or 4 miles an hour when you really need it. Just learn how to throw with command. He talks about how he hardly ever used full max effort to throw his fastball or his slider. And, he finally ended up needing Tommy John, but it wasn't until he was in his 30s. So, and you're right. A lot of this starts at the lower levels with kids sports, especially. This is one of his pet peeves, is that, you go to these youth tournaments and you see parents with radar guns to check their own son's radars speed. Yeah, and he says they should be being taught how to pitch and not about velocity. But on the other hand, velocity is what gets these kids contracts and scholarships and everything else. So I don't think it's ever going to change. I think one thing is these kids play too much baseball now these days because there's such a specialization in sports now.
Yeah, I don't like
that. I'm for the kid who, I grew up playing all three sports a different sport every season. And I think if you're good enough, you're going to get there. And you're going to get to the top as long as you go about it the right way. And you don't need to play, if you're a 12-year-old kid, you don't need to play 80 games a summer. And be, that's where I talk to Peterson and guys like that. That's where they feel a lot of this stuff starts, as far as the stress on the arms that leads to the Tommy John. So, well, they've been trying to get the message out, Smoltz in particular, but I don't know if that's ever going to change.
Yeah. I hope so. Like I was saying, I think hopefully it's got to start with the next generation, the kids coming up 10, 15 years from now. And yeah, I agree. I hate how this whole specialization in sports has kind of taken place. Like you, I grew up playing a different sport every season, and you see, I think Chipper Jones was an excellent football player too. So I remember, he just sticks out. He was a first overall pick. I remember, just a random name. Jeff Francoeur was a excellent football player. We've seen that. There's a lot of great guys who went on to have great MLB careers. They were great in other sports too.
Yeah, I think that the skills that you learn in other sports can translate to baseball, just because, and you learn how to be competitive in different sports in different ways. I think that's important, but I don't know if we're ever getting back to that, because there's so much emphasis now on youth sports and these travel teams and everything else, that I don't think it's going to go back to the old days anytime soon.
I know. Yeah, there's a lot of things now about the way things are in the world. You just wish they were different, but I don't know. We'll talk about that later, but
I that's guess, a whole different subject.
Right, yeah. Maybe you'll do another podcast episode on that. But going back to Noah, I saw your article you had written for SNY TV, how Peterson maybe suggested he'd be better off coming out of the bullpen in 2021 if he does come back in 2021. And I thought that idea had some appeal given his high velocity fastball, that wipeout slider, and like you said before, if he could throw it in the mid 80s, get that velocity difference there between the fastball and slider, but I just like to get your thoughts on that idea of using Syndergaard out of the bullpen if hopefully he comes back healthy and within the correct time frame for next season.
Yeah, well, Peterson's point is that the rehab from Tommy John is such a strain mentally and physically on the body that by the time these guys are kind of ready to return to pitching, it's almost like then they need some time off because of everything they've been through. Yeah. So what he was saying is that you might be able to get more out of Syndergaard by pitching him out of the bullpen and have more success with him as a guy coming out and pitching 1 or 2 innings at a time than having to be able to start and throw 100 pitches a game after going through his whole Tommy John rehab, at least for 2021. And yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I mean, he could be great at it. Control has never been an issue for him, so he's not going to walk guys coming out of the pen. He's obviously got great stuff, so it's interesting. Maybe he ends up becoming the reliever, and they move Lugo to the bullpen because Lugo, I mean, to the rotation because Lugo, I still think could be a successful starter as well. He's got all the pitches, yeah. And we'll see. I think a lot of that might depend on what happens to this bullpen and to this team this year, if assuming there's a season going into 2021. But I just don't think. I mean, you've seen it quoted a lot. Well, Syndergaard will be back for the second half of next year. Well, don't forget that's what everybody thought about Wheeler in 2016, and he had issues with the arm and never could get back. And it takes some of these guys. It just takes longer, and it's not automatic that they're going to be back the next year. So, I don't think the Mets should plan on it. And maybe if they kind of think about a scenario as him as a reliever, that maybe they would get more out of him. But that's an awfully long way down the road, and a million things are going to happen between now and then, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, as we were saying before, I just kind of feel bad for him because the timing sucks too, because he's going to be a free agent after the 2021 season, and who knows if he'll be even willing to pitch out of the bullpen because he's going to want starter type money, and he's going to want to showcase himself as a starter if he comes back next season.
Yeah, he's gonna want to, I'm sure. So that'd be a factor too. But he's not going to get the huge contract that he was going to be looking forward to.
Right.
But
he said
he's still going to be fairly young, though.
Money. He thought he was on a trajectory, like career-wise.
Yeah, I mean, he this was the year he needed to prove that he could get to that level if he was going to do it. He's going to have to. I'm sure he's probably not. I wouldn't think he would end up signing a long-term deal coming out of next year and off the Tommy John rehab. But he'll still be fairly young. He'll be under 30, so he'd have a chance to prove that he can still get it done and get that deal at some point.
Right. Yeah, maybe he'll have to take a 1-year deal, settle on that, and then try to prove himself that next season. But just a couple more questions just to wrap up. I just want to get your thoughts. There's been this push I've seen on Twitter recently for the Mets to bring back the black uniforms that they donned from 1998 to 2011. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, if you had any opinion on that. I like those uniforms personally. I guess that was maybe what I grew up with. I'm 29. I kind of liked how they implemented black into the color scheme when they had the black backdrop on the numbers and the letters in the uniform. I don't know. I'd be for that, but just curious. Yeah,
I didn't have a huge problem with it. I thought they looked okay. I actually thought they looked better in some ways than the blue tops did with the white pants. I guess I'm kind of a traditionalist with the uniform stuff, but I didn't have a real problem with the black, and they had some success with it. So
yeah.
I think if fans are into it, I see Alonso is making the case that they should come back. So I wouldn't be against it. No.
Yeah, just curious your thoughts on that. And just last point, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the passing of Hank Steinbrenner. I know he wasn't really involved in like the operations the way Hal was. I know he more took a back seat, but did you ever encounter him at all? Did you know him at all? I just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He was actually was the main guy there for about a year after George Steinbrenner kind of stepped away when he was starting to have problems. At 2007, when they fired Torrey, and through the 2008 season, And Hank he was not afraid to speak his mind. I think he felt almost obliged to live up to George Steinbrenner's kind of legend as far as being bombastic and everything else. And he was very quotable. He criticized the Red Sox, criticized this and that. He was very public about how he thought that Cashman should have made that trade for Johan Santana that the Mets made. And he wanted Santana. And at the time, Cashman didn't want to do it. Cashman was already looking ahead. Well, he was worried that Santana might be on the decline. And he was also looking ahead to Sabathia being available the next offseason as a free agent, and he wouldn't have to give up the kind of young talent that he'd have to give up Santana. So there was kind of a disagreement there, but Hank was a shoot-from-the-hip guy. I used to see him in spring training especially. He wouldn't be in New York very often, but in spring training you get a chance to talk to him. He was interesting. He had other interests, horse racing. He raised horses. It's got away from the baseball part of it because I think him and Hal both didn't really like being around their father because he was so demanding when they were young. And he was into music, played the guitar. He could talk to you about music. Interesting guy. And then I think he understood at some point that it was probably better for Hal to become the guy to take over, and because Hal was less controversial, and Cashman really didn't like the controversy. He was trying to tamp that down and get rid of the days of the old Bronx Zoo and all that stuff. So I think Hank kind of felt, okay, I'll move into the background, let Hal do it. And after that, you didn't hear from him much. You'd still see him in Tampa in spring training, but he made a point of staying out of the limelight for the most part. But would have been a lot of fun to see him stay in that position because it would have been made for a lot of good stories, at least for guys like us. So over the years, so sorry to see him go. Still a pretty young guy, but he did. I had heard he had health problems over the years, so it's a shame that happened. He also, he gets a lot of credit for starting that team called Hank's Yanks, where they took underprivileged kids from the New York metropolitan area and created a team. And some of these guys have made it to the big leagues that way through that team. So he loved baseball. That's one thing everybody said. And it's a shame to see him die at a young age.
Yeah, only 63, but that was some great insight there. Just some little stories there you had about him, but and condolences obviously go out to the Steinbrenner family on that, but that pretty much hits on everything I wanted to get to. John, just wanted to thank you again so much for coming on. Really enjoyed this, and hope you and your family stay safe during this. Hopefully we get baseball back soon, and we could get back to normal life soon. But just thanks again so much for coming on, and like I said, just stay safe, be healthy, all that good stuff.
All right, Chris, great. Thanks. Good talking to you. I enjoyed it.
All right, thanks. Take care. And that'll conclude things on this edition of the Basic Thoughtonomics podcast. I want to thank John Harper so much again for coming on. I really enjoyed that. Good conversation there. Follow him on Twitter at NYNJHarper. You could also follow me on social platforms as well. My personal social media handles, Instagram, Twitter. It's at ChrisGrosso16. And follow the podcast as well on Twitter at Basic Thought Pod, on Instagram at Basic Thoughts Pod. And thanks so much for listening. Not sure what I'm doing yet for the next episode. Hopefully I'll do another interview, but hope everyone stays safe and healthy and is doing well during this time. Take care.